But hello,
Yeah,
everybody who has joined us. This is actually a webinar on AI-enabled medical devices and the FDA guidance on AI-enabled medical devices. But of course, we are chatting a lot about different topics of what is happening in the US as well. And just a few notes before we begin. We are going to have an interactive chat about different topics regarding AI-enabled medical devices today, and you are welcome to put your questions into chat or Q&A, and we will hopefully get there towards the end of the webinar. But you can write them any point in time that you wish, and if you make them public, then you can also vote for these questions so that we will see which ones are more popular. But before we begin with the questions of the chat, I would like to ask the panelists to have a little introduction of yourselves, and we'll start with Megan.
Hi, I am Megan Graham. I am the VP of Quality Regulatory at Orthogonal. We do software as a medical device development and mobile development. I have over 25 years in the medical device industry, first as a software engineer and moving into quality regulatory. I have worked on a variety of software-intensive systems. I'm very familiar with SAMD and different types of solutions, including healthcare AI in the academic healthcare institution space. So software that is regulated and software that is maybe adjacent to regulated.
Thank you, Megan. We're relying on you to tell us more about FDA and what's going on in the US in general. So I will be bothering you a lot today, but maybe Jovan, you can go next and introduce yourself.
thanks, Marion. Thanks for having me here. My name is Jovan Stevovic, and I'm CEO and co-founder of Chino. Chino.io. It's a company that is assisting many startups and companies out there in the digital health medtech space on GDPR and HIPAA compliance. So we cover all the data protection and security requirements for companies, covering also roles like a DPO, Data Protection Officer as a Service, or HIPAA, Privacy Officer as a Service, and helping them to go to the market, build and launch and face all the customer related challenges, the questions they get, the documents they need to have to sell their products. So thanks for having me and looking forward to the chat.
Thank you guys for joining us. Both Orthogonal and Chino have been our partners for many years now. But Matteo, a few words about you as well.
Yeah, Matteo Bellini, I am part of SoftComply. I'm the CRO there, Chief Regulatory Officer, but my background is actually mechanical engineering, so nothing to do with software. 17 years in the medical device industry, starting actually product design and project manager, and eventually transitioning slowly to design quality, design control, and be introduced to the world of software as a medical device or software in medical devices. Eventually learning something about cybersecurity and AI as well. So by any means, I'm no expert in AI. But I'm trying to understand, and I pretend to have an idea of what the FDA is trying, and the rest of the world is trying to ask from the companies to get the products on the market.
Great, thank you so much, and thank you for everybody who has joined us. So of course we'll start with not politics, I promise you, but but from US. So Trump's back. And with that, we have already many executive orders, one of which is about the kind of removing the barriers on AI leadership in the US. So we wanted to ask Megan, as you are the only one from the panelists in the US, what is going on, and will this potentially make some changes, also revise or roll back some FDA guidances per chance? You know that there is also the kind of the communication freeze, and then there was the pause of new regulations put in place. One of them, I understand, is already having overturned or has been overturned. But what does it all mean? Like, will it potentially revoke some of the FDA guidances, perhaps?
Well, I don't know that I could speak to all of the politics, but what I can say is that the executive order is really any executive order is intended to guide, for example, with the AI executive order. Research in the area of AI, kind of the administration's position on where we're going, makes it what priority it is across the country, and applies to all different AI, not just in regulated environments. When we think about the regulated framework, for example, with the FDA, with medical device manufacturers and medical devices, pharma, the FDA or any other agency would take that as direction and then determine, an action plan in some amount of time. I think it's 90 days or 180 days in terms of what they might want to focus on. For example, we have NIST or NIH in terms of what grants might be preferred. We have what kind of science and technology research might be going on. And then also what's kind of the priority. It doesn't change, nothing has changed as of this moment in terms of the FDA's regulatory framework for medical devices. So that is still in place, because that has a lot to do with different laws and regulations that would have to actually be overturned through Congress. So in terms of manufacturers thinking about what's going on, just like any other time, you're always going to want to be monitoring the regulatory landscape. And especially with AI, it's been evolving so much more quickly and frequently. But right now, we still have the FDA framework in place, and I'm not necessarily expecting that to go away tomorrow. That's something that is not likely to happen.
So we can't forsake all the regulations.
I think we still have to pay regulations, yes.
All right.
Prepared that it's still in place, yes.
Thanks for that. So when we talk about medical device regulations in general, I would say that in a lot of conversations and in a lot of publications recently, we have seen that Europe has been labeled as an over-regulator. That we are kind of, innovation cannot come from Europe because we are having so many regulations in Europe, also for AI, like EU AI Act, that we can't ever get, reach the speed of innovation like you have in US, and of course now China. Well, now China as well, of course, in the game. But maybe, Matteo, a question for you in general, like if you could make a comparison of the regulations in EU and in US for medical devices and the AI-enabled medical devices, what do you see are the biggest differences? And do you see that Europe is overly regulated, much more regulated in these aspects than US?
Yeah, that was a good question. So until a few weeks ago, I would have said yes. With the AI Act, there is a lot of buzzing around, certain amount of confusion. Certain things will come into place actually in February, like the banning of certain prohibited activities and the fact that companies need to educate the users, whether they're internal or external, to the generic use of the AI. But now with this new FDA guidance, maybe I can say that there are certain differences. I mean, the FDA guidance is very specific to the medical devices, and that's it. The AI Act is for any type of device, any type of product that contains AI or is AI. And the concerns of the industry was mostly about what is not medical devices, because if you read it and you compare the requirements of high risk AI with what the MDR or IVDR or general requirements for medical devices, there are not a lot of surprises. In fairness, it's more it becomes more a burden in terms of making sure that you comply to them. There is this requirement that you at a certain point will have the notified bodies coming and auditing you specifically for the AI Act, that they will give you some sort of certificate. But again, it shouldn't really shake the medical device world that much, because when they come in and they audit you for 1345 or MDSAP or whatever else, they just add that. How is going to happen? It's a bit like the MDRs. Nobody really knows when this is going to happen, what type of requirements they will have to have, who is going to be accredited, how, and things like that. And given that the notified body are still very busy with the MDR tsunami, that's a big question mark. So Frankly, I wouldn't say so. What my feeling is that the FDA went more technical. They wrote down specific details of what they want to see in submission, because this is what the guidance is about. We had an interesting discussion earlier where people were asking what's new. There's nothing really new. It's just the way they want to see things so they can find it, and you don't waste their time and they don't waste yours. So they went really into the detail.
Different from the EU Act, right?
The EU Act
AIE
it's still higher level, and it's about any type of device. And at the moment, I think every notified body will have to figure out themselves how to analyze a device that has AI or AI function in it. They will have to kind of have experts in-house, although they don't really have yet, but they will need to get experts in-house that can assess whether this device with AI has sufficient level of details, testing, analysis, descriptions, and so forth. So it's just the FDA is giving, I feel that is giving a little bit more of a structure, what they want to see. The Europe is still very at a high level. They want to do something, but it's not really clear to the general public or to industry exactly what they want. Who is more regulated? I don't know. At this point, I don't know. It's kind of a different approach. The Europe wants a lot, but not sure how. The FDA wants the same thing, but more granular, more detailed. I suppose if you follow the FDA guidance, you will be probably fine in Europe as well.
All right, thanks for that, Matteo. Very, very interesting to hear that. But I mean, we knew that EU AI Act is very generic at the moment. Jovan, your perspective, because I mean, data protection is quite different in Europe and in US. So, what is your view of like the amount of regulation in one or compared to the other?
Yeah, always compare HIPAA compliance to GDPR compliance. And as also Matteo and Megan said before, somehow it's two different approaches. While HIPAA compliance is sectorial for US sector, it's been there since several years, not changed much. I started studying HIPAA compliance back in 2010, and since then it didn't change much. So that gives also somehow a perspective that things that are not really changing that much in the sectorial sector, even though politics change a lot. So the HIPAA compliance sectorial, very precise also in how data is anonymized, but perhaps we can chat about that later. But while GDPR in Europe, it's wide, it's European, it's a regulation. So I think that in Europe we have two problems. We are broader. We try to create laws that are broader, but what happens at the end is that each single state defines its own additional requirements. One example of this nightmare that is being created for startups and entrepreneurs, innovators, is the DiGA, Digital Therapeutics Reimbursement Framework in Germany, which is famous for many things. It's a pioneer framework, so it's good, it's great. It's a first thing. Also, it doesn't exist also in the US, so we are really innovating this space in prescribing and reimbursement of digital therapeutics. But over time, the regulator started adding more and more national-specific, German-specific requirements and certifications that now it's a nightmare for startups to go through all the data protection and security requirements only in that bucket. Then there is the MDR, then there is the providing proof of evidence that you are doing something good for the healthcare sector. So it's really complicated. So in Europe, we have this problem of creating national specific standards that are hard to keep up with. By the way, coming back also to Matteo's observation that it's also unsure what's the difference between Europe and US. Also in US, for example, in terms of privacy, since 2018, there was the CCPA, the Californian Privacy Act. Over the years, many states, there are 50, many states define their own privacy laws, not all of them defined, and there is no federal privacy law still in US. So also in US, there is a bit of a derailing in terms of privacy regulations and fragmentation. So we need to stop with that. If we want a single digital market, whether it's European or US market, we need to stop with single state level regulations and simplify things.
I completely agree. We have the same problem. I mean, I'm from Estonia myself, which is a very small country in Europe, in EU. And we also have the same, we have like a standard ISO 27001 Estonian version, which is so much more demanding than the actual 27001. And I mean, this is just like a country of 1 million people, right? So like, what are we talking about? Why? But maybe then we'll get to Megan's perspective. What does it look like for you? I mean, US is the biggest market. Everybody from Europe is eventually trying to get there. How does it look to you?
So all of these things really do make the regulatory framework complicated, right? But at the bottom line, what I think the FDA is trying to do in particular to navigate all of this is really focus on best practices for software development and best practices for AI/ML specifically. So that's the part that's common in terms of standards, local standards or international standards, but really thinking about, developing, it all comes back to when you're developing a product, whatever industry you're in, you have to understand who is it for. You have to use practices that, in terms of development, right? Because software is manufactured during the design and development phase. You have to be thinking about things at that stage, and then after in the monitoring stage of making sure that it actually does what you say it's going to do, and that it's safe for the people that are using it, that it's intended for, and that it's effective. So if you think about all of the noise, if you will, of everything, all of these different frameworks, there are specific things to understand for each environment from that regulatory perspective and maybe from a requirements perspective for your product. But at the end of the day, you're trying to create a safe and effective product. So some of those practices haven't really changed dramatically. And that's where, when we look across not just different geographies for medical devices, but just different industries, especially when it comes to AI/ML, if there's a practice that works well that you can adapt into your organization, that would be something to consider. So that's where there's only so much complexity you can understand. It kind of comes back to, what does that product need to do? So I think that helps to offset some of that complexity that's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we'll try to get to the bottom of this and then go through the different aspects that FDA is kind of hoping that manufacturers put together for them to be able to review about medical devices and also the AI aspect of it, or the functions of it. So thanks for that. We are going to jump to data management. This is basically, I think, the biggest change in medical device regulations when we talk about AI-driven functions, because this is somewhat new for manufacturers who haven't not had AI-driven functions in their devices before. So I will be targeting Jovan here for many questions. And this is, of course, to kind of relate also to DeepSeek. So everybody knows what is happening in this case, that everybody now is talking about the data protection around DeepSeek. And of course, there is a lot of innovations in the AI models, but something that I think Jovan can tell us a little bit more about is this recent queries about data privacy. What type of data is collected? How is it processed? Why is it processed by DeepSeek? And what is the purpose of it? And basically, FDA is doing the same. It's trying to gather a lot of information from the AI-enabled medical device developers to understand if the quality of the data has been good that has been used for training the AI model. So, Jovan, can you tell us a little bit about the entire? I mean, we don't need to talk about DeepSeek only, and you can take this subject as broad as you wish. But what types of data can be used? How do you protect that data? How do you make it secure and throughout the entire kind of AI-enabled device development? Like, what should we do, Jovan?
Yeah, it's a topic for the whole evening probably, but I will try to squeeze it and keep it simple. So there is one main problem with, one main thing that DeepSeek or OpenAI did that medical device companies cannot do. and which is basically scrapping all the public data and stealing the data from each other, because now OpenAI is accusing this DeepSeek of stealing their outputs and distilling them and using them. So that thing that they are doing, medical device companies cannot simply afford it, cannot simply do it, because they cannot access legally to such type of data that they need. Why? Because large language models, these DeepSeek and OpenAI, they access web data on the web freely available, but they are violating laws. And there are many lawsuits now. For example, the last one I was reading yesterday about is Italian Data Protection Authority suing or raising the question, and there are many companies suing now and authors suing OpenAI because it stole the data, even though publicly available, it's not for free. So there are copyright issues there. So when it comes to if we go down deeper into medical device space and digital health space in general, that's doesn't matter. We are always talking about sensitive data, health related data. And so the first question that companies, startups need to ask is, okay, what is really my business model? Am I B2B or B2C? Because if I'm B2B in US, I'm under HIPAA 99% of the cases, because I'm a provider to covered entities or to other business associates. As a provider, I'm called business associate. So I'm in a chain where I'm part of this game where I need to follow rules set by somebody else. So all the data that I get, they need to follow certain requirements that I can define with my partners there. So the rules are defined by the law and by the contract agreement that you have with your customers. The same applies also in Europe if you are B2B. GDPR applies to a certain extent, because at the end, what matters is your agreement with your customer, what your customer allows you to get to do with the data. Then if you are B2C, in US, it's a bit more complicated because there is no HIPAA. So there is FDA, there is FTC, there are national privacy laws, but you need to check all of them. It's a bit more Wild West also to a certain extent, because, for example, California Privacy Act hits only very large companies. So those below, what the question is what you can do, what you should do, and so on. In Europe, GDPR applies whether it's your B2B or B2C, the same concepts. The main challenge in getting the data is having the rights, the legal basis, the so-called legal basis in Europe, or the rights or the basis in US. And here there is the whole topic about anonymizing data, for example. All companies, whether in B2B scenario, let's consider the B2B scenario in Europe and US, they all would like to access to the full data to train their algorithms. Full data means pseudonymized data. Companies don't want names and surnames of patients to train algorithms. They would like to access only to data, full data, but without identifiers. And here, the main difference between European and US market, HIPAA versus GDPR, where in HIPAA, by removing specific identifiers, the list of specific identifiers, you get a subset of data that is very high quality, typically, very detailed. You don't need to merge, to elaborate, to process the data in order to reuse it. This is called identified. It's equivalent to European pseudonymized to a certain extent, but in US, you have the full freedom for using this data as it was anonymous. It's not anonymous, but as it was anonymous. So you have full freedom to use it to develop your product and to elaborate, to keep it, to process it. While in Europe, pseudonymous data is still personal data. So there is still obligations under GDPR. You're still under the umbrella of GDPR. So you still need to follow a lot of rules and the contract with your customers. That's the most important thing, because in Europe, they will oblige you to keep it, to delete it, to apply data retention policies, data security, and so on, to follow still the contract. While in US, you are basically out of this legal framework and you're much more free to do whatever is necessary for your business and algorithms and development of the product. So it's really, at the end, the key question is which market you are playing, what are the requirements set by different data protection laws, and how you can avoid certain laws. And then there are so many other things to consider. For example, in order to get the data, you could also search, you can buy data from biobanks. It's a very hot topic nowadays. So biobanks, or you could start research activities with hospitals, but that's a quite costly thing. So for example, in Europe, we have a lot of European funded activities and projects where companies collaborate with hospitals, but somebody else pays the huge expenses. So there are many other considerations to make on how to get the data, how to approach this thing. But the most important starting point is, okay, what is really the legal framework you are in order to get access to the data?
That definitely sounds like we should have another day for, for going into the details of all of that.
At least half a day.
I mean, yeah, but related to that, then, like, when you're collecting data and for the training purposes, Megan, what do you feel? What is the extent to which FDA is expecting manufacturers then to describe how they have collected the data? Where did they get that data? What type of data have they used for training the models? What is the extent to which the manufacturers have to go here?
Yeah, I think Yvonne's description of the data privacy and security was absolutely that foundation. What the FDA also is looking for, which is similar to what they've always looked for, is what kind of data are you depending on? What are you doing with that data? How are you acting on it? What are your inputs? What are your outputs? And what's the scientific basis for why that data is going to lead to the output? So in other words, who is it for? Which patients? What are the demographics? What are the characteristics that you're evaluating? And why should we trust the model, the output of the model? So speaking to the AI/ML enabled devices. So they're wanting to know that you came by that data legally and appropriately. And then so you've already had to explain that. Now you're having to explain your rationale for, what is that model actually based on? They're looking for things like, does it actually apply? What kind of built-in bias might there be? Any kind of aspect? Does it artificially reinforce some kind of discrimination? That's something that's being looked at. And over time, what kind of controls do you have in place to make sure that it continues to work safely and effectively? So, so they're looking at both that. Did you get that data, accurately? Are you protecting that data? But also, does it even make sense? So increasingly, the FDA with AI/ML is starting to ask for clinical evidence to justify that particular model's behavior. And that is, I think, new. If you're used to doing software as a medical device, or maybe SAMD, and maybe you're coming from the class 2 world where some of these products are living right now, all of a sudden now you're having to think about clinical evidence. So that is something very new and emerging that I've seen with AI and ML enabled devices.
Yeah, I actually want to pick on one of the things you said now about when you continuously develop the AI models, and we have talks of data drift. So what is happening there? I mean, over time the models are changing, and the data may change in the models that you're using. How can you then ensure that everything is still okay? What kind of monitoring systems is expected to be put in place by FDA, well, from the FDA by the manufacturers?
Sure. So the FDA is requiring the same type of monitoring or surveillance depending on the classification of your device that they always have. Right now, the FDA has authorized, like, I think over 1,000 AI-enabled devices. And that data, if you look at their website, that data goes back to like 1995. But as of like September, and then I haven't seen any Gen AI devices yet. I'm sure that they are still in the life cycle. I'm sure the FDA has seen them, but I haven't seen any that have been cleared. So the importance there is that you're still releasing a version of your model, and then you freeze it essentially, and you are monitoring its use just like before. So you're going to want to use tools and methodologies to look for things like drift, just like you would for any kind of AI ML model, and then look at complaints and make sure it's still performing within its specification. You want to make sure you want to be watching out for new uses or unintended use, just like you always would have done for any medical device. What is new and emerging beyond that is really, and what the FDA is really looking at, and I put shared some links with the Digital Health Advisory Committee, is they're starting to look at how do we regulate Gen AI. So that's where it's actually changing a little bit more in real time beyond from where the current practice is. And they've started to implement certain frameworks like the predetermined change control process or a predetermined change control plan, and different things to start looking at more of what I would consider kind of this a very highly iterative process, right? So maybe you're employing more of a DevSecOps model once you have released that AI ML. So that's something that you're changing very quickly. But that's the shift that's been needing to happen, that the FDA has been looking at, is how can we actually provide a regulatory framework that enables that innovation and allows for that change, because that is a best practice for software in general. You want to be able to respond to changes, but you also want to be able to make sure that the changes don't adversely affect it. And so all of that, what I am seeing is quite a bit going back to the academic world of we're still developing techniques for how to do that. What are even the metrics? So increasingly, and what are the tools that we can use to make this easier? So that's the kind of that shift. And one of the reasons why the FDA has released so many different guidances.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the predetermined change control plan. I mean, this is something that is also very, very, I mean, it's good for SAMDs as well as the AI-enabled medical devices, like you pointed out, but you don't need to put in place a new submission, but you can follow the plan. But then again, you need to have a very good plan in place in the first time around. So you need to already plan what would potentially change so that you would be okay or accepted by FDA. But going back to a little bit to the mess with DeepSeek, or the discussion with the DeepSeek and the data protection, and I mean, from the user side, and this is I'll take Matteo because he hasn't talked for a long time now. But what do users as customers of AI systems as well as devices need to know to be sure that their data is safe and protected, and nobody is using it without their consent? Like what do you see as a user you would check?
As a user, I haven't used them much, frankly, ChatGPT or any of the likes, DeepSeek or anything. And definitely, I wouldn't try to go in and enter some personal details or whether they are related to health or anything else, because everybody heard it many times. If the product is free, it means that you are the product. So just use them with cautions, like a developer use it, for example, to help with code development, to get solution if they get in stock, and that's absolutely fine. Or they use for more innocent things like doing fake picture of who knows what. But going deeper than that, and using, like as Johan said, if they scrape it off the internet and it was there, then the problem is somewhere else. Somebody, you either left them there willingly or not, or somebody sold it to them or exposed them. So the recommendation is like a recommendation that I give my kids when they go on the internet first time. Just be careful what you write and be careful what you share. If you don't need to, just don't do it, because especially commercial product or this free product, you really get real protection? Are your data really safe? I don't think so. Like once you share them, then you have a promise that they will be managed in a certain way. But if these companies, the developing company then uses them to do something else, you may not even know it. So these are the part of more the Wild West side of AI. And then, of course, you have the part that is more regulated, medical devices or the likes, where, of course, things are different. Like if as a user, as a patient, or as a operator of the medical device, I have to enter some of my information, I can be relatively sure that this data is managed correctly. If my data, if the hospital has my data, and the hospitals have my data, and they share it they sell this data to companies, I'm sure that they, at least reasonably sure, that they will do it in an ethical way, whether it's anonymizing them or doing something like that. And frankly, it could be even fine, say, well, my data will help then optimize an AI or do something that may help other people. So from the medical device side, I wouldn't really be too concerned. It's more still like the one that is on the news, that this a language model that can do these things, and they can sound like real users or real people that talk to you, and they can scrape data, so they have a vast amount of knowledge. For medical devices, the AIs are very focused on what they have to do, no more, no less than that. That you feed them data, you feed them specific data, controlled data, cleaned up data, you go through QC to make sure the data makes sense, and they give you a certain output. So in terms of privacy, I like, even before AI, even when software was just software and algorithm were just algorithm, even when you were doing it on paper, that you were sharing your information anyway, I wouldn't be too concerned, other than cybersecurity events, but this is a different discussion. But in terms of AI and how software and developers and medical device manufacturers use your data, I wouldn't be particularly concerned.
All right. Thanks for that, Matteo. I know Jovan wants to jump in here because that is, I mean, he's our data protection expert. So Jovan, what do you say?
I totally agree what Matteo said from the end user perspective. So I want to hear perhaps to add the point of view for startups and companies developing solutions, because there is a huge difference. Because as Matteo said, when you use something online, well, cloud is somebody else's computers. And if we want to understand how important is this topic of giving our data as citizens to somebody else, we can check how US government is trying to describe TikTok, or Biden administration, how to try to describe TikTok as evil, because they spy on us, the data transfer to China, they profile us, and so on and so forth. Exactly the same thing that Facebook, Instagram, Facebook, called Meta, and all social networks are doing since several years. To us, they just do that in US, not in China. Who is worse in what type of data they are collecting to compare this? It's a discussion here for, again, for an evening or a beer, perhaps not business. But but here the question is, okay, startups, companies, what they should consider. And the first thing is DeepSeek, for example, can be better than OpenAI, because you can download it and run it on your computers, on your servers. So you can claim to your customers, whether it's pharma, insurance, hospital, as a B2B company, medical device, or digital health company, you can claim that you have full control over data. There is no data transfer outside your servers. Or, as many companies or hospitals want here in Germany, they want the data to be on-premise, on their servers. So they will ask you, many cases, to deploy your solution on their servers. So you will be able, with DeepSeek, to do that. So it's actually, even though it's coming from China, and we should be worried about that, it's actually potentially a better solution than OpenAI in that sense. But the key thing that companies need to have is a data processing agreement in Europe, or a business associate agreement in US, if they fall within HIPAA. So these two documents, business associate agreement, BAA, and DPA, the data processing agreement in Europe, are the key contractual documents that companies need to have with every provider they are using for their product in their company. Because B2B, it's not about the privacy policy and checking that. It's about the terms and conditions and the data processing agreement or business associate agreement, because it's a chain of responsibility. Perhaps our listeners heard about NIS2 directive. NIS2 directive is another law we have in Europe, or directive, not applied in each single state. It's all about value chain. They try to establish the cybersecurity framework for all the companies, in the chain, from the top big ones, mission critical ones, down to all the providers. And there is, for example, the possibility that B2B medical device companies or digital health companies are part of that value chain. So they will need to consider also NIS2 directive in the near future. But another topic for another session, I guess. So it's all about this chain of responsibility. So those agreements and contracts are the fundamental part.
All right, thank you for that. We'll definitely follow up with a beer and the discussion of where the data actually is.
we can check that.
Yeah, but let's maybe then go to the FDA guidance, because we have been talking well for most of the time about everything except for what we wanted to talk about, the FDA guidance on AI-enabled medical devices. And so the draft guidance was published on January 7th, I believe. And there is a lot of guidance documents that FDA has given out about how to provide documents to FDA about how you developed your medical device and your software and so on. Megan, as a manufacturer, let's say a medical device manufacturer who has been doing medical devices or developing medical devices before and now have an AI-driven function in their medical device, what do you say is now additional that they would need to provide in their documentation for the submission that FDA is expecting based on this guidance? What are the things that they should focus on, really?
Yes. So if you're a medical device manufacturer and you've been doing this for a while, my first question was, how much of that has been software, application software? So software as a medical device, because that is a little bit easier to go from that state to AI.
Let's go from that. Let's go from SAMD.
If you've done hardware, you need to also then transition to understanding how software is different in general. But if you are now adding an AI/ML enabled function into your device, I think the FDA, the draft guidance, has laid out kind of that checklist of items that you need to be thinking about. One of the first things is that providing that clinical rationale or clinical evidence for kind of the justification for why your model actually does what you think it needs to do. I see a lot of companies it forces you to get really crisp about what is that context of use, not just intended use, but what is that context of use? How is this actually fitting into the workflow, the clinical workflow? And how is it going to be used? Who are the different users? Just like any other software, but it's really important in thinking about where is that data going to come from. And again, for startups, it can be very difficult for them to and expensive to actually get access to clinical data. But kind of what does it do? That piece is really important to get clear on. And then taking a look at your QMS and your practices and procedures and skill set, and making sure that you're thinking specifically about what is unique to AI/ML. Not everything is new all of a sudden. It's not like we're going to go do everything new. But for example, AMI TIR 34971. We have the link for that. For example, identifies, if the risk management that you're doing is from 14971. This helps you identify risks that would be specific to AI/ML enabled functions, device functions. So thinking a little bit differently about those aspects I would also say really lean on what you currently do and only change what is really different. It's also really important, which I like what Yvonne said, really think about what your business model is. So how, when you've got a device, like a hardware device, it's typically here's a product that you're, providing. A lot of times your AI ML enabled functions might be incorporated more into a workflow or a clinical service that's provided. So you might be evaluating a report or an image in radiology, for example. That has much more of an impact on that clinical workflow. So you want to be thinking about that, what does it do more from a system perspective and a use perspective, maybe a traditional medical device.
Okay, thank you for that. Matteo, do you want to add anything here? The question was is
Sorry, I
there
was on mute.
if there is additional documentation that AMD companies should focus on?
Yeah, more from a practical standpoint, not being an expert in software, no, and AI, is that first of all, you need to bring in knowledge of people who know how AI works. You can't just take an AI model and train it to do something because you will be asked how that model works. They want to see some sort of architecture. They want to see some sort of input and output. And if you don't have AI specialists, although I suppose that there are guidance on how to train an AI and somebody who is a software skilled person can do it, there will be gaps. And once you get somebody who has specific knowledge of AI, a lot of the things that the FDA is listing in the guidance will not be completely new, because I don't believe there is anything incredibly new there. I think Megan said it's kind of more of the same, but very specific for AI. So this is what I would do, is not just take something and tweak it to do what you want it to do, and that's it. I mean, software developers have been using third-party code forever, whether it's free, libraries, operating system, and whatever else, or modules that you pay, for example, encryption, libraries. They've been doing it forever. And the idea is that, well, people know what they're doing. This library, I either can give a look at them, or they come somebody who is a known provider of operating system. I don't know, BlackBerry, just QNX, to name something. They've been doing this thing for a long time. AI is new. These models are new. You do not know what happened, how they were created, what their problems are. So you can't just pick them and treat it like another soup element and whack it into the device, because that's not just, it is soup, but it's the core of your device. It's not like an operating system and then you put in your own logic. That is the logic. You feed in data and you expect that they output certain results that are accurate. And even if you prove that, to say, these are my data, I trained it, then I have verification and validation data, I put them in, I got the right answer. You don't know everything. It's a big, deep black box, an AI model. And we are still in a situation where everything is relatively new, especially in the medtech, and we don't know what we don't know.
Absolutely. And I really like what Megan, you also said, that think of what is the real benefit of it. What is the benefit of adding AI into the device in the first place? I think that's really, really nicely put as well. We have some questions, and we amazingly haven't even gotten halfway through our discussion. But maybe one of the things that of the topics that we wanted to talk about that would be beneficial for the audience to know. So a lot of companies, or there is a lot of chat that is very beneficial to talk early on with FDA in the submission process, because it speeds up the submission process. Megan, in your experience, what are the questions that a medical device manufacturer should ask FDA to speed it up, like to get the submission going faster? What are the practical tips and tricks here?
That's a great question. Just in general, when you're meeting with the FDA, you need to do your homework. They're not going to be they don't want you to come to them and just ask a bunch of questions. They want you to present an argument, understand your device. You need to be able to describe exactly what that device does. You're completely familiar with that device. The FDA reviewers and people that you're talking to, they look at tons of devices. So you need to really make sure you're clear about what it does and just focus on the pieces that they care about, right? So we're thinking any product, what does it do? Where do you get the data? What are the outputs? What specifically, what's the how does it do that at a high level? And remember, all of the communications are confidential. So you're going to probably have to get into some of your proprietary information. Because they're just looking for how do we have confidence that this is safe and effective. So that's really
very
important.
good. That's very good that you said that it's confidential, because the extent of the depth that you need to go in describing the AI models, that is your kind of your business secret, right? Or the data that you're using. I mean, this is something that you might feel like, maybe I don't want to share it, but if it's confidential, it makes sense, right?
You're going to have to share it with them. That's right. I mean, they can't evaluate your product unless they know the principles of operation. How does it actually do it? You don't have to tell them every aspect of your, secret sauce, but you do need to be able to describe more. And I do find that startups, people who are new to medical devices, this is very uncomfortable, but the FDA is just trying to understand how that works, and it's their job. So they're going to ask these types of questions. And then the aspect of the pre-submission is really a lot of times you're developing something innovative. There might not be a code already for that particular device. So you want to really do some homework in terms of what do you think that regulatory classification might be, so that you can make an argument to, I recommend to manufacturers, keep your regulatory burden as low as possible, optimized, right? Because I do see companies, take advantage of the fact that the FDA recognizes that if you're operating on a general purpose computing platform, an iPad, that's not a medical device. So take advantage of those things that they've already agreed. But if you come into the FDA and you just tell them this is a medical device, they're not necessarily going to challenge you on that. They might suggest maybe you don't want to do that. But they don't want extra burden either for themselves. That's just too much to divide. So focus really on the key risks and what do you really need to know. You might need to take several submission meetings with them over time. You won't want to go in with more than maybe 3 questions. Kind of keep it really simple and focused. You'll have maybe an hour.
Good to know. Thanks for these tips, Megan. We have a few questions, but I know when we take these questions, we are pretty much out of time for the rest of the discussion. So I'm gonna drop some links in the chat that you can then follow up on. And just so you know, there is a lot of annexes or appendices in the FDA guidance documents, as always, that provide you really good information of where to start or how to implement different aspects of the recommended the activities that FDA is talking about. But let's then take a few of these questions, and I think the first one is for Jovan. You guys can see the questions, right? Jovan, can you see? Yeah. Okay. So it's about the data transfer agreement. Yeah. Go ahead, Jovan. You can summarize the question and give us an answer.
It's a very good question about data transfer agreement that was established last year between Europe and US. Now we can use US cloud providers without any issues. Sometimes we still have them, but in some very conservative cases and countries. But we can use US providers. So the question is whether with Trump this could change. I think the question is correct. It's very good, and unfortunately, I don't know the answer. It's really going to depend on our relationship with US. But there is also one more thing. It maybe also doesn't relate at all with Trump administration, because there is already discussion whether this framework that was established gives any benefits at all now, and it's being challenged as the previous agreements have been challenged. So perhaps the new agreement is going to be cancelled anyway, because it didn't improve basically anything. The paranoia I was mentioning about TikTok ban, we should have it as Europeans because US companies are treating us as third world citizens, basically no particular benefits in terms of privacy or protection in terms of privacy, even though we claim to be friends and commercial friends and commercial partners, but nothing of that is happening, and there's complaints already going on. I'm talking again here about geopolitics. It looks a bit, far away from us doing business and developing startups and companies, but actually we have seen in the past years that geopolitics had really a big impact for European startups, especially because they were really under scrutiny and they couldn't sell to hospitals if they were using Amazon AWS, for example, in Europe. So it's really a big topic if it happens again. How to prepare for that? Keep it simple if you can. So use services that you can ideally move easily to OVH, French provider, very good, very big ones, or some other providers. But for example, there are many other things to discuss, but some of those providers don't have enough certifications to work with European hospitals. Even though they are European, they don't have sufficient certification. So it's very complicated. Perhaps you can reach out to me if you have more questions about this.
Absolutely. Thanks for that. We can't see what the future will bring, unfortunately. But I think the next question, maybe Matteo, you can take that.
Can people read the question?
I'm not sure, so let's maybe summarize it.
Okay, so it says, can a software product include both regulated and non-regulated feature, provided that the non-regulated feature are not exposed to users? If so, what key factors should be considered to ensure compliance, maintain regulatory boundaries? Okay, there is a nice guidance from the FDA that talks about that, and it goes into the details. So I can't remember exactly the title, but it explains how you should separate the two parts. What feature are medical feature and what feature are not medical feature. And this kind of it provides examples. It explains you how to do it. So first of all, you identify what's medical and what's not medical. And then you treat the medical part as usual, and the non-medical part is more risk-only type of features that you don't really care too much. Well, at least the FDA doesn't care too much if it works or not, but as long as it doesn't impact the medical part. The question also says, if the non-regulated feature are not exposed to users, so I'm not really sure exactly what this means, or maybe we are talking about a product that, depending on a flag, can be medical, and if you turn it off, then it becomes something else. But the concept is always the same. You have to make sure that the non-regulated, the non-medical part does not affect negatively the medical features. But again, I would definitely recommend that you give a look at that guidance, because it's
Megan
really,
was kind
really
enough
good.
to put the link here in the chat. So if
Yes,
anybody
please.
wants to check out the guidance, then it's there. Megan, do you want to add anything to it as well?
That's a great. I love that guidance. I'm glad, Matteo, that you mentioned it. What I recommend to manufacturers, this is actually a normal state. You're going to have a mix of regulated, non-regulated, or different classifications. The other thing to think about is that version 1 of your, especially with startups, but the version 1 of your device might have non-regulated aspects that you're planning to add features to, and then suddenly that software is now regulated. So it's really, really important that you think through your product pipeline, that you build a software system architecture that separates out your different modules, which is just best practice for software architectures. You want to have them more modular architecture, so that you can manage that regulatory burden and make sure that your products have sufficient rigor. All aspects of your system have sufficient rigor so that whatever you want to be able to do with that product over time, again, the design process and the manufacturing process, and you don't want to have to re-architect your system just because you add a new feature where your non-regulated piece is now regulated, because all of those requirements will now apply. So really, that's where you want to know what is your data, what's your data flow through the architecture, and what are the different functions. And that will help you to stay ahead of anything you want to do in that pipeline. So really, really important that you're architecting your system for that scenario.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Matteo. Thank you, Jovan. Oh, we have one more question, but we are running out of time. So I did add the links to Orthogonal and Chino here as well. But the last question: how do you see the maturity of AI within medical device QMS and beyond the product? How should a QMS control check the use of business? Check the business use of internal AI.
So I'm not quite sure if I'm answering the question or if I'm understanding the question, but what I would say is in general, what I see companies doing, if you're incorporating, whether you're a medical device or not, or you're adjacent, you have a mix, if you're incorporating AI-enabled functionality into your business, I typically see companies wanting to establish a policy, a position, and some kind of governance, whether it's light governance or more intensive governance, and to make sure that they are aware of all of the AI in their organization, and that it is working legally, on the right side of the laws that are applicable, but also effectively. So that's what I see companies and organizations doing, is establishing governance models within their QMS or their business practices.
Thank you, Megan. Matteo, did you want to add something here?
It may take a while to discuss all of this. Like in terms of probably on, I want to just repeat what Megan said. I was actually talking to a company 24 hours ago, and they said, well, we want to introduce this AI in the company as a help tool, and February is coming, and the AI Act, what do we have to do? I said, what do you use it for? And I was hoping, I said, tell me that it's not HR or anything like that. I said, no, we want to help people do like that. I said, just make sure that people know that there is an AI there, they know how to use it, they know the principle, they know what they have to put in, what they shouldn't put in, and what they expect out, and that's it. Keep it light, keep it simple, but try not to all of a sudden use it for something else and say, oh, it's working really great now, let's start screening candidates for job positions. Just make sure that the scope is really well defined. In terms of the QMS and the medical side, it's a longer discussion. Sorry, Ryan.
We can take it separately in another call. But I mean, thank you everybody. Thank you everybody who joined us for the webinar. Thank you, our great panelists. And I'm sure with new kind of news about AI and maybe Trump and FDA, we'll reconvene and talk more about what is happening and what is expected, as we actually didn't cover half of the topics that we wanted to cover today. But there is a lot that we can talk about. You can get in touch with Orthogonal or Chino or SoftComply ourselves if you have any questions at all, and any topics that you would like to hear more about. So thanks once again, and have a lovely day.
Thank you, Marianne. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.